The thunder of hooves scattered the dust as Katherine Foster clutched her swollen belly, tears streaking down her face while the stagecoach disappeared into the horizon. Abandoned in the middle of nowhere, miles from Silver Creek, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the promise of new life within her, Katherine had never felt more alone. 3 months pregnant, betrayed by the man who swore his devotion, and now left to the mercy of the unforgiving Wyoming wilderness of 1877. Katherine sank to her knees on the hard-packed dirt road, the autumn wind whipping her chestnut hair across her tear-stained face. Her fiancé, Thomas Wilkes, had seemed the perfect gentleman when he'd courted her back in Boston. His tales of opportunity in the West, of silver mines and cattle fortunes, had swept her away from her comfortable life as a schoolteacher. She'd believed every word, especially when he'd proposed marriage before they'd left. But the moment she'd told him about the baby, everything changed. "You think I want to be saddled with some whining brat?" He'd snarled earlier that morning, grabbing his bags from their rented room above the saloon. "I'm headed to California. Gold's waiting for me there. You're nothing but dead weight now." When she'd followed him to the stagecoach, pleading, he'd paid the driver to take her to the next town. But halfway there, Thomas had instructed the driver to stop and force her out, tossing her carpetbag after her before continuing their journey west. The sound of approaching hoofbeats pulled Katherine from her despair. A lone rider appeared on the ridge. Instinctively, she scrambled to her feet, searching desperately for somewhere to hide, but the vast open plains offered no shelter. The rider spotted her and changed course, heading straight for her. As he drew closer, Katherine could make out a tall man with broad shoulders atop a magnificent chestnut stallion. His face was shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see the weathered leather of his duster and the glint of sun on his spurs. "Madam." The rider pulled his horse to a stop several feet away. "You all right out here alone?" Katherine straightened her spine, one hand protectively covering her belly. "I'm fine, thank you," she replied, her voice betraying her with a slight quiver. The man dismounted in one fluid motion, removing his hat to reveal piercing blue eyes and a strong jawline shadowed with stubble. "Begging your pardon, but you don't look fine." He glanced at the road stretching in both directions. "Stagecoach leave you behind." Something in his direct but gentle manner made Katherine's resolve crumble. "Not exactly," she admitted. "I was asked to leave." The stranger's eyes narrowed as they flickered to her hand on her belly, understanding dawning in his expression. "Name's Henry Nash," he said, extending a calloused hand. "I've got a ranch about 5 miles east of here." Katherine hesitated before accepting his handshake. "Katherine Foster, I was headed to Silver Creek." "Silver Creek's another 15 miles, Henry replied, looking at the setting sun. "Won't make it before dark, and these parts ain't safe at night." He paused, considering. "My sister lives at the ranch with me. You're welcome to stay until we can get you to town tomorrow." Katherine assessed the man before her. His clothes were worn but clean, his manner straightforward but respectful. She had few options, and nightfall in the wilderness with wolves, and who knew what else seemed far more dangerous than accepting this cowboy's help. "Thank you, Mr. Nash. I would appreciate that." Henry nodded, retrieving her carpetbag and securing it to his saddle before turning to her. "Can you ride?" Katherine eyed the tall horse warily. "It's been many years." Without another word, Henry stepped closer, his hands hovering near her waist. "May I?" At her nod, he lifted her effortlessly onto the saddle, then swung up behind her. The ride to the Nash Ranch was mostly silent, save for the rhythmic hoofbeats and occasional directions Henry gave to his horse. Katherine was acutely aware of his solid presence behind her, his arms on either side as he held the reins, careful not to press against her. As they crested a hill, a modest but well-maintained ranch came into view. A 2-story wooden house stood proudly, with a large barn and several corrals nearby. Cattle grazed in the distance, and smoke curled from the chimney, promising warmth inside. "It's not much," Henry said close to her ear, "but it's home." A woman with honey-blonde hair emerged from the house as they approached, wiping her hands on an apron. Her eyes widened at the sight of Katherine. "Henry James Nash, what have you brought home this time?" she called, though her tone held more curiosity than accusation. Henry dismounted and helped Katherine down, his hands lingering at her waist just long enough to ensure she was steady. "Margaret, this is Miss Katherine Foster. She was left stranded on the road to Silver Creek. Miss Foster, my sister, Margaret Nash." Margaret's sharp eyes took in Katherine's disheveled appearance and the subtle curve of her belly. Instead of judgment, her face softened with compassion. "You poor thing, come inside before you catch your death. I've got stew on the stove." The Nash home was simple but comfortable, with handcrafted furniture and colorful quilts that added warmth to the wooden interior. Katherine sank gratefully into a chair at the kitchen table while Margaret ladled generous portions of rabbit stew into bowls. "Eat up," Margaret encouraged. "You're feeding too now," Katherine flushed, her spoon pausing midway to her mouth. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to another woman," Margaret assured her. "Men are typically oblivious to such things." She cast a meaningful glance at her brother, who was removing his gun belt by the door. "Not entirely oblivious," Henry countered, joining them at the table. "Just respectful enough not to mention it." As Katherine ate, the warmth of the food and the kindness of these strangers began to thaw the icy fear that had gripped her since Thomas's betrayal. When Margaret insisted she take a hot bath and change into a clean nightgown, Katherine nearly wept with gratitude. Later, settled in the small guest room beneath a patchwork quilt, Katherine allowed herself to truly contemplate her situation. She was alone, pregnant, with few marketable skills in a frontier town where women were either wives, schoolteachers, or saloon girls. The money Thomas hadn't stolen would last a month at most. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Margaret entered with a steaming cup of tea. "Chamomile," she explained. "Good for settling the stomach and nerves." Katherine accepted the cup with a grateful smile. "You've been so kind, I don't know how to thank you." Margaret perched on the edge of the bed. "No thanks needed, the West isn't kind to women alone." She hesitated. "If you don't mind my asking, what are your plans?" Katherine stared into her tea. I hope to marry Thomas Wilkes. He promised me a new life here." Her voice broke. "But when he learned about the baby, he left me on that road like discarded baggage." Margaret's face hardened. "Men like that deserve a special place in hell." She squeezed Katherine's hand. "Listen, Silver Creek has a small schoolhouse. Last I heard, they're desperate for a teacher, if you've got any education." "I was a schoolteacher in Boston," Katherine said, hope flickering faintly. "Well then," Margaret smiled, "perhaps this isn't the end of your story, but the beginning." The next morning, Katherine woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Dressing in her plainest dress, she made her way downstairs to find Henry already at the table, reading a newspaper while Margaret worked at the stove. "Morning," Henry greeted, his eyes lifting to meet hers. "Sleep well." "Better than I expected," Katherine admitted, taking the seat across from him. "Margaret mentioned you were a teacher," Henry said, folding his newspaper. "Silver Creek's been without one for months. Kids are running wild, much to their parents' dismay." Katherine nodded. She mentioned that. "I'd be grateful for the opportunity." "I'm heading into town today," Henry offered. "I can introduce you to Mayor Wilson." After breakfast, Katherine found herself once again on Henry's horse, though this time in a proper side saddle position that Margaret had arranged with a spare saddle. The journey to Silver Creek gave Katherine time to observe Henry Nash more carefully. Unlike Thomas, who had talked incessantly about himself, Henry was a man of few words but thoughtful ones. He pointed out landmarks, warned her of potential dangers in the territory, and shared small insights about the townspeople she'd soon meet. Silver Creek proved to be a growing frontier town with a main street lined with essential businesses: general store, saloon, blacksmith, and a small church. People paused in their activities to watch as Henry escorted Katherine to the mayor's office. Mayor Wilson, a portly man with an impressive mustache, was delighted at the prospect of a qualified teacher. "Providence has smiled upon Silver Creek today," he declared, shaking Katherine's hand vigorously. "The schoolhouse has been empty since Miss Winters left to marry a rancher in Montana. When can you start?" "I would need lodging," Katherine began hesitantly. Mrs. Abernathy runs a respectable boarding house for single ladies, the mayor assured her. Though I should warn you, she's quite particular about her tenants' reputations. Catherine's hand instinctively moved to her stomach. I see. Henry, who had been silent during the exchange, stepped forward. Miss Foster is recently widowed, he stated firmly. Her husband died on the journey west. I believe even Mrs. Abernathy would agree that's respectable enough. The lie startled Katherine, but she kept her expression neutral as the mayor nodded sympathetically. Of course, of course. A tragedy indeed. Well, Mrs. Abernathy can't object to a widow. The position comes with a modest salary, $30 a month. Will that suit? It was barely enough to live on, but Katherine had no choice. Yes, thank you. After finalizing the details, Henry escorted her to the boarding house, a narrow two-story building with lace curtains in the windows. Mrs. Abernathy, a stern-faced woman with iron-gray hair, scrutinized Katherine thoroughly before accepting Henry's story about her widowhood. I'll need 2 weeks' payment in advance, she stated. Before Katherine could respond, Henry placed coins on the counter. Consider it a welcome gift to Silver Creek, he said when Katherine began to protest. Once they were alone on the porch, Katherine turned to him. Why did you lie for me? And pay for my lodging. Henry's blue eyes held hers steadily. This town is quick to judge and slow to forgive. A widow gets sympathy, an unmarried mother gets scorn. As for the money, consider it an investment in Silver Creek's future. Those children need education. Katherine studied his face, searching for ulterior motives but finding none. I'll repay you. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I know you will. He tipped his hat. I'll check on you in a few days, see how you're settling in. True to his word, Henry returned 3 days later, just as Katherine was finishing her first week teaching in the one-room schoolhouse. She had 15 students ranging from 6 to 16 years old, with varying levels of education. Some could barely write their names, while others had a basic grasp of arithmetic and literature. Katherine was erasing the chalkboard when Henry appeared in the doorway, hat in hand. Miss Foster? She turned, surprised by how pleased she was to see him. Mr. Nash, what brings you to town? Brought in some supplies, he replied, stepping into the classroom. Thought I'd see how the teaching was going. Katherine smiled, gesturing to the rows of desks. The children are eager to learn, if a bit unruly after months without guidance. Henry nodded, moving closer to examine the lessons written on the board. Impressive. You've covered more in 3 days than the last teacher did in a month. Education was my passion in Boston, Katherine admitted. It's good to be teaching again. Henry leaned against her desk, studying her with those penetrating blue eyes. You miss the city, Katherine considered the question honestly. I miss certain conveniences, running water, libraries, but there's something about the openness here that speaks to me. She placed a protective hand on her growing belly, though I worry about raising a child alone in such a wild place. Henry's gaze followed her movement. You won't be alone. Towns like Silver Creek pull together for their own. As weeks passed, Katherine found truth in Henry's words. While some townspeople whispered about the widow, whose grief hadn't dampened her appetite, noting her expanding waistline, others were welcoming. The children adored her, and several mothers brought her home cooked meals and hand-me-down baby clothes. Henry visited regularly, sometimes with Margaret, bringing books for the school or small comforts for Katherine. Each visit left her more confused about her feelings. Thomas's betrayal had left deep wounds, yet she found herself looking forward to Henry's visits with an anticipation that went beyond friendship. As her 4th month of pregnancy progressed, making her condition impossible to hide, the whispers grew louder. Mrs. Abernathy cornered her one evening, lips pressed into a thin line. I run a respectable establishment, she began. Your condition suggests your husband's passing was more recent than implied. Katherine lifted her chin. My personal tragedy is just that personal. The next day, she received a letter giving her 2 weeks to find new accommodations. That same afternoon, Henry arrived unexpectedly at the schoolhouse. Margaret sent me, he explained as they walked along Silver Creek's main street, said you might need a friend today. Katherine couldn't hold back her tears as she showed him the eviction notice. "I've nowhere to go, and on a teacher's salary, I can't afford to build or buy." Henry was silent for a long moment, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "There's a cabin on my property," he finally said. "It was the original homestead before we built the main house. It's small but sound." Katherine stared at him. "I couldn't impose it's sitting empty," Henry interrupted. "Would be a favor to me to have someone keep it maintained." His eyes, usually so direct, shifted away. Plus, Margaret would welcome the company. They both knew it wasn't just about the cabin or Margaret's companionship. Something had been growing between them, something neither was ready to name. The cabin proved to be a charming one-room structure with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, and enough space for a bed and cradle. Margaret helped Katherine settle in, bringing curtains and quilts to make it homey. "Henry rebuilt this place himself last summer," Margaret confided as they hung the curtains. "Said he wanted it ready just in case." "In case of what?" Katherine asked. Margaret's knowing smile said everything she wouldn't put into words. "In case the right person came along, I suppose." Winter descended on Wyoming territory with a vengeance. Heavy snows made the 5-mile journey to town increasingly treacherous. After Katherine nearly got caught in a blizzard returning from school one Friday, Henry insisted on driving her to and from town in his wagon. These daily journeys became precious time together. Katherine learned about Henry's dreams for the ranch, his parents who had died in a Comanche raid when he was 16, leaving him to raise Margaret alone. He listened as she shared stories of Boston, her love of literature, and her fears about motherhood. One evening, as Henry stoked the fire in her cabin after bringing her home, Katherine felt the baby really move for the first time. She gasped, both hands flying to her rounded belly. Henry was at her side instantly, concern etched on his features. "What is it? Are you in pain?" "No," Katherine breathed, wonder in her voice. "The baby, it's moving." Without thinking, she reached for Henry's hand and placed it on the spot where she'd felt the butterfly-like flutter. For several heartbeats, nothing happened. Then a decisive thump pressed against his palm. Henry's expression transformed from concern to awe. His eyes, filled with an emotion Katherine hadn't seen before, locked with hers. "That's amazing," he whispered. Neither moved, his hand warm against her belly, their faces inches apart. Katherine could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes, count the days of stubble on his jaw. "Katherine," he began, his voice rough with emotion. A sharp knock on the door shattered the moment. Margaret entered, carrying a basket of fresh baking. "Hope I'm not interrupting," she said, though her knowing smile suggested she knew exactly what she'd walked in on. The incident marked a turning point. Henry became more attentive, bringing extra firewood, making sure Katherine had everything she needed. But he also seemed more reserved, as if afraid to cross an invisible line. December brought Christmas preparations and a temporary break from teaching. Katherine spent her days helping Margaret with holiday baking and working on baby clothes. Her belly had grown significantly, making the long-ago betrayal by Thomas seem almost like a blessing in disguise. Had she stayed in Boston, she would have faced disgrace and ostracism. Here, despite the initial challenges, she had found a community and possibly something more. On Christmas Eve, Henry invited Katherine to join them for dinner at the main house. He arrived at her cabin at dusk, carrying a small wrapped package. "Merry Christmas," he said, offering the gift as she invited him inside. Katherine unwrapped it carefully to find a beautifully carved wooden music box. When she opened it, a delicate melody played Brahms' lullaby. "Henry," she whispered, deeply touched. "It's beautiful." "Thought the little one might like it," he replied, a hint of color in his cheeks. "My father made one for my mother when I was on the way." Katherine impulsively reached up to kiss his cheek in thanks. As she did, the baby gave a particularly strong kick that made her gasp and laugh simultaneously. Henry's hand automatically moved to steady her, landing on her belly just as another kick came. His eyes widened at the strength of it. "Seems like he's going to be as strong as his mama," Henry said softly. Katherine placed her hand over his. "Or she might be a dancer." Henry's eyes held hers, something unspoken passing between them. "Katherine, I know this isn't the right time with everything you've been through, but I need to say it." He took a deep breath. "I care for you more than I should, perhaps." Katherine's heart pounded. "Henry, let me finish," he said gently. "I know this child isn't mine by blood. But every time I feel it move, every time I see you talking to it or singing while you work, I can't help thinking." His voice grew husky. "I want to be there for both of you." Katherine felt tears well in her eyes. "You've already done so much, not out of obligation," Henry insisted, his hand still warm against her belly where the baby continued to move. "Out of love." The word hung in the air between them, momentous and fragile. "I love you, Katherine Foster," Henry continued, his voice stronger now. "And I already love this child, too." As if responding to his declaration, the baby kicked forcefully against his palm. Henry smiled, looking down at their joined hands on her rounded belly. "Ours," he said simply. "If you'll have me, this baby will be ours. I'll raise it as my own, love it as my own. No one in Silver Creek or anywhere else needs to know differently." Katherine's tears spilled over. After Thomas's cruel rejection, after the uncertainty and fear, here was a man offering not just security but love for her and her unborn child. "Are you certain?" she whispered. "People will talk." Henry's laugh was gentle. "Let them. We'll know the truth that this family was formed by choice, not chance." Katherine reached up to touch his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw. "I love you too, Henry Nash. I think I have since that first day on the road." Their first kiss was tender, a promise sealed in the warm glow of the cabin as snow began to fall outside, blanketing the world in pristine white. They were married on New Year's Day 1878 in Silver Creek's small church. Katherine wore a dress Margaret had altered to accommodate her 7-month belly, with sprigs of holly in her hair instead of a veil. The townspeople attended in force, any remaining whispers silenced by the obvious devotion between bride and groom. 2 months later, during a late winter storm that howled around the cabin's sturdy walls, Katherine went into labor. Margaret served as midwife while Henry paced outside, wearing a path in the fresh snow between cabin and main house. After 6 hours of labor, a healthy baby girl entered the world, her lusty cries declaring her arrival. When Henry was finally allowed inside, he found Katherine propped up in bed, cradling a tiny bundle wrapped in one of Margaret's quilts. "Henry," Katherine said, her voice tired but jubilant, "meet your daughter." Henry approached reverently, sitting carefully on the bed's edge. Katherine placed the newborn in his arms, watching as the tough rancher melted at the sight of the infant's rosebud mouth and wisps of dark hair. "She's perfect," he whispered, one finger gently stroking the baby's cheek. "What shall we name her?" "I was thinking Hope," Katherine suggested, "because that's what she represents to me." Henry nodded, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Hope Nash, it's a fine name." In that moment, as Henry cradled baby Hope while his free arm encircled Katherine, the bitter memory of Thomas's betrayal finally lost its sting. What had begun as abandonment had led to something far greater, a love built on choice and commitment rather than fleeting passion. Spring came early that year. By April, Katherine was teaching again, with baby Hope sleeping in a cradle beside her desk. The students adored their teacher's daughter, especially the older girls who begged to hold her during recess. Henry expanded the cabin that summer, adding a proper bedroom and extending the main living area. Katherine planted a garden, and Margaret taught her to preserve vegetables for the winter. Life settled into a rhythm of work and love, challenges met together rather than alone. On Hope's first birthday, as family and friends gathered to celebrate, Henry presented Katherine with a deed. "Happy anniversary," he said, placing the document in her hands. Katherine read it, then looked up at him in surprise. "You're putting the ranch in my name too?" Henry nodded, his arm slipping around her waist. "It's ours, just like everything else. I want you and Hope protected no matter what." That night, after the guests had departed and Hope slept peacefully in her crib, Katherine and Henry sat on their porch watching the stars emerge in the vast Wyoming sky. "Do you ever regret it?" Katherine asked softly. "Taking in a pregnant stranger, raising another man's child as your own?" Henry turned to her, his face serious in the fading light. "Not for a single moment. The day I found you on that road was the luckiest of my life." He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. "Some men spend their whole lives searching for what I found that day." "And what's that?" Katherine asked, though she knew the answer. "Home," Henry replied simply. "Not this land or these buildings, though I cherish them, but you, and hope you're my home, Katherine Nash." As if summoned by her father's words, Hope's cry drifted through the open window. Katherine rose to go to her, but Henry gently pulled her back down. "Let me," he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead before heading inside. Katherine remained on the porch, listening as Henry's deep voice began singing a lullaby to their daughter. The same tune from the music box he'd given her that Christmas Eve, now sung with all the love of a father for his child. In that moment, Katherine realized how completely her life had transformed. From the desperate woman abandoned on a dusty road to a beloved wife, mother, and teacher all because one kind man had seen value in her when another had seen only burden. Inside, Hope's cries quieted as Henry continued singing. Katherine closed her eyes, savoring the sound of her husband's voice mingling with the night chorus of crickets and distant coyotes. The West had not been the dream Thomas Wilkes had painted, but it had given her something far more precious, a love as vast and enduring as the Wyoming sky above. 5 years later, with Hope starting school and 2-year-old twins James and Elizabeth playing at her feet, Katherine would reflect on that fateful day when betrayal had led to blessing. The cowboy who had placed his hand on her belly and claimed an unborn child as ours had given her not just his name, but a future filled with more love than she had ever dared to imagine.